So since the latest assignment is working on opening titles, I wanted to specifically show you a couple of more text animation techniques since that's the majority of what you'll be animating. So first things first, you can add a text layer with the text tool or by going to your layer menu and then new and text. Another shortcut, if you can call it that, is Command-Option-Shift-T will also add a text layer to your document. So basically if you add every modifier, Command-Shift-Option and T for text, that'll also add text to your already made composition. Now I'm going to just make up some opening titles for, let's say, Alvin and the Chipmunks, but this is going to be like some kind of like Total Recall, like Chipmunks 2020 or something like that. It's going to be all dystopian. So I'm going to type in my text. So I'm going to need Alvin. And first I'm going to choose my fonts and things like that that I want. By default, you probably have Open Auto Panels checked on at the top of your palette or toolbar. So automatically the character and paragraph palette open. I could just kind of zip those to the top. And I'm going to choose a darker color. I'm going to choose a different font. And make this a little bigger with just my scrubbing tools. That does not look dystopian. It's like Metropolis. Yeah, there we go. Great. So I'm going to center align this text just by clicking on the stage. And now, so far, we've already seen all of the different variations of animation we can do by looking at things like position and scale and moving this around. We've also looked at some presets that we can add by going to our animation menu and choosing Browse Presets. And this was something that we looked at much earlier on, but this is going to launch Bridge. And within Bridge, we are going to have access to look at a bunch of different effects that are built into After Effects, which you've already seen. But just in case you forgot, if you go into text, there's tons of different types of effects here. You can click on it, it'll give you a preview. And I could apply text to a selected text layer simply by having Bridge open and double-clicking on an effect. So I'm going to do drop bounce just as an example. Now it's extremely easy to add an effect, and if I scrub through this or hit the space bar for play, you could see it do what it's supposed to do, which is bounce in. I also can see the effect up in the effect panel and in the effect palette, but specifically I want to twirl down the options of my text, and you'll see within the text layer that there's something called an animator. And an animator is something that's added to control specifically type. And this one is controlling quite a few things. There's a couple of selectors, and essentially if you look at all these little dots, these are showing you previews of keyframes. Remember, you're not truly seeing keyframes unless you see the yellow diamond. So I'm going to tap on this layer and then hit U to expose all keyframes within the animation. And you can see it's affecting the selectors and then bouncing and things like that. So as we tag through the different layers by going J and K, you can see what each attribute does and so on. So these are things that you can edit, but I wanted to show you how you can make your own custom text effects, and then it'll help you better understand what you're doing here. So I'm just going to click on this text effect, and I could delete it or undo. But I basically want to delete that animator. It's very easy to do that. You can see there's no keyframes anymore. Now within the text layer, I actually have an empty text layer here, which I'm just going to click on and delete. That's very simple to do, especially when you're editing the type. It's exactly like Photoshop in that if you see the box around the type tool, it means it's going to make a new layer if you click. So I need one for Simon anyways. I also need to deselect the type, otherwise it's going to not commit to it. And the easiest way of doing that is by clicking on the black arrow button, which is kind of primitive, but it's what we do. So I've got my Simon layer and Alvin's layer. Now, if I want to animate type, I'm going to turn off one of the layers so I can see just Alvin here. And if I twirl down the text layer, I have a little thing to the right of that called Animate. And this is only going to be for text done in After Effects. So if you twirl down a text layer, you have this little right option arrow next to the word Animate. And if you click on that, you'll have a variety of things that you can animate within your text. Now, let's say I want to animate the scale. So I choose Animate, Scale, and it adds an animator, which if you've added the presets before, you've probably seen all kinds of animators and selectors in your code. So the animator operates through a selector and then the properties that you're changing. Now, this is different than just changing the scale of the asset, which would change the whole thing. Because I told it to change each character by going through Animate, watch what happens when I increase scale. Do you see how it's increasing each letter individually and not increasing the whole shape by itself? So this is a way that you can get a lot more custom type effects, like tracking is a really popular thing to animate, or having something kind of fade in and assume the size that you want. Now notice that there's also a little thing called add here. I'll get to that in one sec. Before then, each one of these range and scale properties has a stopwatch, which means we can animate it. Now this is pretty cool. I can change how I want to affect the scale. So I'm going to increase the scale to be a little bit bigger than normal, but then I can control where it is within the piece of text by altering the start and end. You can see that this little bar goes through the type and it will affect what's there. So if I wanted to, I could have it start at the end and then move the playhead along, and then I could change what's animating. So if I just do a really simple kind of tween here, you can see it will work backwards and make each letter bigger. Now I also have the end, which I could just control what it's affecting. So these just give you parameters to animate in. You also have offset, which lets you control a certain amount of range at a time. Now that's even more powerful if we add another effect. So you can add another property, such as rotation. And if I add that, it's within the same animator, and you can see that I can also rotate each letter individually. Now, since we've already covered 3D and things like that, another thing I wanted to show you using this technique is that if you click on the Animate button once again, the very first option is Enable Per Character 3D. And if you click on Enable Per Character 3D, things like position or rotation are going to get the z-axis, which all 3D layers do. So if we say Enable Per Character 3D, now you get those three axes, X, Y, and X. And now if you do something like rotate, you can see I can animate them on the z-axis, or where they are within the timeline. So I'm going to actually add another select a property here. For example, I'm going to change the position. And you can see that there's a third number for z, and I could actually make things come nearer and farther, even though they look like it's just changing scale. But if you change the start and end of that, you can actually see how it affects each letter individually. Okay, so you can have like your text pop out at you or something like that if you use this effect. Or you can have it rotate back and away from you as it's animating. So there's a lot of really cool custom effects that you can do if you add a text layer and then use that animate property. So now remember, this is in addition to all your basic animation. So let's say I want this to, it's going to start like that and then just kind of become normal, but I want it to actually animate in. So I'm going to collapse everything by tapping M. And with the text layer selected, I'm just going to click P for the position of the object, not for the text. I'm going to move my playhead out a little bit, hit the stopwatch, slide it off screen once I move the playhead off to the beginning. And now you can see it will animate in, and I still have all those letter animations as well. So let me just do that. I'm slow that down a little by spreading out the keyframes. And you can see that I actually want that to start a little faster. Oops. That's why it's important to navigate with J and K so you know you're moving the right properties. So I'm going to have this actually happen faster since the other effect is pretty fast. You can see each letter kind of has additional animation instead of just having the position animating.